Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. But today, what I wanted to do is not read, but talk to you about why it's important to read classical literature on my website. So let's spend a few minutes together, and I'll give you an idea of why this website is very different than other websites, and also our YouTube channel, which emulates and mirrors what's on the website. So, I'm not going to tell you anything new. We are all living in a fast-paced, rat-paced world, right? Of media, short content, news releases. And let's face it, we've become a visual society, which is why classical literature sometimes feels outdated, intimidating. Just give me the bullet points. We often hear that. Oh, just give me the elevator switch. I'm reduced. I heard today, I'm reduced to just giving the board members one page. They're too busy to read more than one page. Well, we read books. Why? So really the argument is, why am I promoting reading books 100 years, 2,000 years old? When modern stories are much more comfortable, readable, you read it, you put it down, you pick up another one. And I'm going to tell you that in this short video. Especially why we read when we can just listen. Well, you can listen to Jimmy or read with Jimmy. That's really the biggest difference. There's something magical about reading, especially reading out loud. My mom read to me when I was a kid. Taught me how to read. I used to read when I taught English before I became a businessman. There's something mystical about reading out loud the classics. Because, believe it or not, and if you go to my website and start reading with me, classical literature matters a lot. I have a saying, the more you look, the more you see, and the more you see, the better you know where to look. I've practiced that my whole career. So what I do on my website and YouTube channel is I teach you how to look and to see the words of classical literature. The words. We show the words, we read the words, we discuss the words. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the timeless power of words. And that's why today's arguments that they just want the bullet points really doesn't hold up. It really doesn't. Would you rather be operated by the guy who read the bullet points on brain surgery, or the guy who read the books? You see? So what I'm going to do is show you the words on my website, and then I'm going to read them to you. Slowly at times, faster at other times. The cadence depends on what I'm reading, and it's so much better than an audiobook. You can still treat me as an audiobook, which some people do. We have one listener who actually listens to me as a podcast when he walks his dog. But nevertheless, that's what this website is about, is reading classical literature, which, ladies and gentlemen, is all around you. You just don't know how to see it yet. Because if you think for a moment that you're the only one who's thought about love, power, arguments, battles, think again. These have been part of the human condition since man was created. And I want you to think about that, because that's what classical literature does. It helps us understand the world. I often say in many of the analysis that I do, you read the classics to learn how other people lead their lives, and therefore how to lead your own. That's really what this is about. So I created Reading with Jimmy to do just that. This is the world of classical literature right here. It's unlike other websites or YouTube channels because I read and analyze with you, not to you. We do this together. And there are 6 bullet points. Sorry, there's no pun intended. That they're not really bullet points. I'm going to expand on them. But there's 6 points I would like to explore with you today in this short video about what'll happen when you start reading with me. And I hope you start reading with me. The first point is that classics explore timeless human experiences, plural. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. Classical literature, and remember, there's Lysistrata, one of the books we'll talk about today, has been around for over 2,000 years. They endure. They're not like reading a modern novel or a paperback bestseller that you get. You read it, you put it down, and you go to the next one. Classical literature is so rich in human experiences that you can go back again and again and again and walk away with more than you walked with the first time you tasted it. Love, power, fear, ambition, injustice, I could go on. These concepts are part of our human condition. And when you think about it, even if you're experiencing this for the first time, well, no one's ever felt like this, Jimmy. Of course they have. Think again. Great literature has been around a long time and got you covered. They got you covered. For example, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote over 600 years ago something called the Canterbury Tales. It's about a group of people who get together and they go on a pilgrimage. And then each person tells a story. And the winner of the story gets a free dinner as judged by the tavern owner who actually starts this contest. It's a beautiful collection of stories. And one of those stories is the Knight's Tale. The knight, who's one of the pilgrims, tells a story of two knights, of course he does, who fall in love with the same woman. Well, that's never happened before, has it? Of course it has. It's happening every day. Isn't it? Two people fall in love with the same person. And when you read Jimmy, here's how we approach such a topic. Well, first of all, we read together. I show you the text, and then I read it with you. And in this case, it's a translation because you couldn't read the Old English that Chaucer wrote in. It would be very difficult. So Jimmy always selects one of the best translations around. I've been around these things a long time. I majored in English. My degrees are in English, even though I was a businessman. And so I read them with you. I don't just show you or read to you. I read it with you. And that's one of the benefits of reading with Jimmy. I show you the text and every word. There's notes, there's little arrows that highlight things, but I don't stop to discuss it. We do that when we analyze it, which I'll show you in a second. So for example, if we were to read the Knight's Tale together, I would basically start out a short introduction. And then I would say, once, as old stories tell, there was a prince named Theseus that in Athens ruled long since. Prince since, see how it rhymes? Now, if you know who Theseus is, that makes this reading so much more richer, right? Theseus, who was a Greek, that's called an allusion. And we talk about that in the analysis. But I know classics can be hard. I know they can be hard. But, what is easy? What comes easy isn't really rewarding, is it? I also know how to make this difficult stuff easier for you when you read it with me. So after we read the whole Knight's Tale, which is the longest tale in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, we're going to do an analysis. This is after every piece of literature we read together. Reading and analysis. Reading and analysis. So in the analysis, which happens after we read it. Now, some people, they jump to the analysis. I've seen that, and I've heard from people because they email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. I don't know why they do that. I think I do. They're writing a paper or something like that, which is fine. But they miss the whole point of reading and learning about the words of classical literature. Even though in the analysis, I'm going to repeat the words of the classic. So in this case, one of the people who's telling the story of the pilgrims is actually a pilgrim himself. So he's in the story and he's telling us about all these stories that these pilgrims talk about. So in the beginning, in the prologue, the introduction to the tales, this narrator actually observed all these people, described all these people. You can see that here. A knight was with us and was an excellent man, who from the earliest moment he began to follow his career loved chivalry. You see, he actually described what the knight is like, so we can get a picture of him and use our imaginations. Ladies and gentlemen, no other website approaches classical literature like this, and there's a lot of websites you can go to. I read with you. I analyze with you. I don't assume anything. A great philosopher, John Locke, said that we're born with our blackboards that are blank, and people start writing on our blackboards. What does that mean? Well, it means that how do you know what you think is really what you think? So when you approach classical literature, every piece of literature that I read to you, I tell you right up front when I analyze it, erase your blackboard. Don't have a preconception of what a knight is. Don't even think about it. Just read the story and form your own impressions. There's no better critic than you. None. Zero. In fact, one of the things I did after I started my website is I made these 10-minute quick takes. What's that? Well, this is a teaser. In 10 minutes, I break down all the Canterbury Tales, which there's a lot of hours, on my website to give you a feel for what this is. This is actually taking in 10 minutes an introduction to all the stories, not only in Canterbury Tales, but every story has a 10-minute quick take. So you can taste it and say, well, I want to read this or not. Don't stop with the 10-minute quick take. All right? But it's there for you to enjoy and to find out if you'd be interested in something like this. So getting back to exploring human experiences in classical literature, you'll find Guy de Maupassant's The Horla. This is a horrifying story. It's an unbelievably tense story about a guy who goes crazy. He goes mad. He thinks there's a spirit, there's something there's an evil living with him. He believes that. And you feel his slow descent into madness. This is one of the most, or is he mad? Or is there in fact an evil thing called the Horla? Well, that's up to you to decide. We read it and then we analyze it, right? And you cannot hold a candle, no pun intended, to Guy de Maupassant when I have a lot of stories by him because he's one of Jimmy's favorites. He's really good. And then there's The Prince, which is, there's many pieces of The Prince and there's an analysis of those pieces. If you've ever heard of people saying, oh, geez, I want power, or that's a Machiavellian, he's Machiavellian, and you ever wondered what they think, they probably never read this, but you can read it with Jimmy on his website. This is the definitive texts of power, the definitive text. He wrote this to his sovereign, Lorenzo de' Medici, who, by the way, never read it, unfortunately. I don't know why. We don't care why. We stay inside the story. This is the best book. And if you think you know because of what other people say about Machiavelli, they're probably wrong. Read it for yourself and you be the judge. That's the beauty of this. So even though these settings are older, they're historical, the emotions and the conflict are really unbelievably true. And when you read the classics with me, you have to realize people centuries ago struggled with the same questions you have, that I have, that we have all the time. So what should I do? How do I maintain power? How do I gain power? How do I lose power? You think it's changed now? I don't think it's changed. Just look around you. That's what the struggle is these days, isn't it? Power struggles. So this connection between our experiences and the historical experiences builds empathy, perspective, and gives us a rich idea of how to lead our lives. The second point I want to make is that reading classical literature will strengthen your critical thinking skills. What does that mean? Critical thinking skills, right? Well, do you think for yourself? Or do you think what others tell you to think? Do you even know what you think? This is that blackboard example from John Locke I told you. A lot of people wrote on Jimmy's blackboard until he read John Locke, and then he realized, I don't really know what I really think. So Jimmy erased his blackboard. That's what makes reading classical literature so rich. Because you don't know what another person's thinking. They don't have a glass head. You can't tell. So when a guy tells you, hey, you should really consider this stock to buy or something like that, you don't know what's the motivation. In classical literature, you can see the motivation. You can go back and prove the motivation. This is a wonderful way to sharpen your critical thinking skills. Let me give you an example. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the definitive thinker of all time. You know who he is? He was a Roman emperor. And what he would do is he would go out during the day and kill barbarians, and then he would come back at night and he would write in his diary, his meditations. What would he write about? Well, he was trying to figure out how to be a good emperor. He wasn't writing about how to kill barbarians. He was writing about what he should do as a person, how he should listen to people. Do you know any politicians that really listen to you? Do you know anybody that listens to you? Really listens. He said one of the things he wrote in Meditation 9 was, he who does wrong against himself. He who acts unjustly to himself, because he makes himself bad. Can you argue with that? Can you think about that? He's basically saying whenever you do something wrong, you don't hurt the person you're doing the wrong to. You're hurting yourself. Well, Jimmy, I don't believe that. Read the meditations with me and we'll talk about it. And you can always email me your own thoughts. But ladies and gentlemen, the truth within these meditations to sharpen your critical thinking is enormous. Henry David Thoreau, interesting fella. He wrote an essay called Civil Disobedience. So if you think the protests you see nowadays, Jimmy's a 60s child, if you think the protests you see in the 60s were different than the protests in the 20s, blah, 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 right? Think again. This is a guy who believed slavery was wrong and the war with Mexico was wrong, and he was willing to go to jail for it. And he wrote this wonderful essay. However, when you read that essay, one of the things he said is the government is best which governs least. Right? That's what he said. Think about this. The government is best which governs least. And that government is best which governs not at all. What the heck is he talking about? That's why this will sharpen your critical thinking, because many people cite, civil disobedience, he tells us to disobey when we've got a cause. We've got this cause. Think about that. The government is best which governs not at all. That's an absurd statement. But we can cover that when you read with me. By the way, this was written in 1849. Can you imagine that? And then there's Jack London for sharpening your skills to build a fire. A wonderful classic short story, a beautiful short story. But a guy who thinks he knows better. Do you know anybody like that? Who thinks they know better? This guy thought he knew better. He went out to Nicole, pay a heavy price. He died. I don't want to give away. It's a spoiler alert. But he dies because he thought he knew better. I was the same way. I didn't die, but I thought I knew better than my parents when I was growing up until I found out, well, maybe there was something to what they were talking about. So it helps us understand critical thinking. And by the way, we do analyze this. So engaging with these ideas helps develop your critical thinking. And that's why you read the classical literature. It's very, very important. Point 3. Reading classical literature shapes modern stories and culture. What are you talking about, Jimmy? Well, there's nothing new under the sun. You know who said that? right? King Solomon, Ecclesiastes from the Bible. There's nothing new under the sun. When you read classical literature, you're going to recognize modern stories that take from literature, that steal from literature, that borrow from classical literature. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Ready? The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a beautiful horror. It's a horror story, or is it? It's actually, he murders his sister, but we can talk about that when you read it with us. Netflix had a whole series, and they changed the whole plot. It looks nothing like originally what Edgar Allan Poe wrote. This is a haunting story of Roderick Usher. And when I read it to you for the first time, I think I can prove to you Roderick murdered his sister. Nobody talks like that. But when you read this critically thinking, I'm going to show you that he does that. Got it? Or how about The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell? A beautiful short story, a classic short story. When you read it with Jimmy, you're going to see echoes of Rambo, The Running Man. This has been done. This is a story about the most dangerous game. Two hunters are hunting the most dangerous game. It's not an elephant. Do you know what the most dangerous game is, ladies and gentlemen? It's another man. You hunt men. This is one of the most powerful stories of fear. Fear is one of those great emotions that runs throughout classical literature. And it's part of all of us. We all have fear at one point or another. Do you let the fear conquer you, or do you conquer the fear? What is fear? And then there's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. This is Jimmy's when he first started the website, this was it. And I went a little overboard when I analyzed this, because this is such a good story. Many people think this is a wonderful children's story. That's wrong. That was the buzzer. You're wrong. This is an adult story, a coming-of-age story, a finding out of who you are. There's a great scene, right, with the caterpillar smoking a hookah saying, "Who are you?" Remember that scene? He's asking Alice, and she says, "I don't know who I am," because she keeps changing sizes. Well, Jimmy, we don't change sizes. No, but we do change, don't we? Change is the only constant that you know. You change every day. You are influenced by this, by that, by the other. This book was written by a mathematician. There's tons of math in here, tons of it. But you gotta be trained to see it, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what I do. I read every word. I got a little carried away on some of the scenes, and I had to laugh a lot. I'm sorry, but that's what happened. I don't know. Check it out. The fourth point that I want to make is classical literature improves your language and communication. Well, Jimmy, if nobody talks like that, why should I learn how to talk like that? I'm not saying you learn how to talk like that. I'm saying you enrich your language. Right now, if you see something that's really good, what do you say? What do 9 out of 10 people say? Can I share it with you? Oh, that's awesome. Sorry. That's awesome. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? The English language borrows from all these other languages and is so rich. And when you read these words with me, you're going to gain not only an appreciation, but you'll be able to use these words, perhaps, in everyday language. So when someone tells you to go check out the latest deli, you can answer, would you like me to reconnoiter that? Sorry. I'm not saying you should say that, but you'll enrich your vocabulary. Because remember, all communication depends on the sender-receiver understanding what the words are. And if you don't define the words the same way the receiver does, guess what? You're not going to be understood. You just won't. Awesome. Well, what does that mean? It means something different. Awesome. That's a great word, but what does it really mean? Let me show you what I'm talking about. Hamlet, one of the most difficult things to read nowadays, because, nobody talks like this, right? I've heard some, Jimmy, it's so hard to read, I couldn't take it. Well, read it with me, as I would correspond with them. And when they finished, they said, I gained a better appreciation of what he was doing, because it is hard. But we're not going to dumb it down. I will not dumb it down. You have to rise to the words. I'm bringing you to the words, because that's the only way we're going to learn. You're not going to learn by dumbing everything down. You just won't. It's a challenge. It's like mathematics. You're not going to learn by just learning the multiplication tables. You're not going to do it. So come with me and read with me. For example, in Act 5, he picks up the skull that's given to him by one of the clowns in the story. And the clown tells him, this is the same skull, sir, that was Yorick's skull, the king's jester. So he's holding the king's jester's skull. Now, if you don't know what a king's jester is, you got to look it up, but I'll explain it to you when we talk about Shakespeare. So he takes it and he holds it in his hand. He's standing there, and he makes one of the most famous speeches of all time. Now, Jimmy, I never heard that. Well, that's why you read classical literature with me. And he says, alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. Horatio's his buddy. He says, he was a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy, and he had borne me on his back 1,000 times. And now, how abhorred in my imagination is this? My gorge rims at it. Now, some of you, 9 out of 10 perhaps, don't know what abhorred means. You don't know what I'm talking about, but I will explain it to you. And imagine yourself holding a skull. What do you say? Ew, this sucks. Whoa. This is wonderful language. He says, I knew him and he carried me on his back. Yorick was around when Hamlet was a kid. You imagine that? What would you say? By abhorred, it means extreme disgust. He's disgusted that he's dead. He hates it. He's loathing. He has a loathing feeling. How rich is that? How rich is that? Or Nathaniel Hawthorne's Minister's Black Veil. An unmatched short story. A beautiful short story. This guy, he's a preacher, right, in Puritan days. And he goes and he comes out to preach one day, and he's covered in a black veil. And everybody doesn't understand why he's got this veil on. So they start whispering. What? Did he commit a crime? Has he got some disease? And he tells people, I'm just not going to take it off, ever. And he doesn't. It's a wonderful story. Even on his deathbed, he's laying there, and he's got this black veil on. And he looks around, and he says, what does he say? Quote, I look around me, and lo, on every visage, every face, I see a black veil. Boom! What do you think? We all hide behind veils. I had an English teacher once, and he was a Christian brother, and he had a collar, white collar on, as Christian brothers wear, and he was talking to us and lecturing us once, and he pointed to his collar, and he said, we all hide behind something, don't we? He was just talking about an analysis of a story, and he was touching his collar. We all hide, don't we? We don't show our true selves to anybody, or do we? Do you tell your loved one who you are? That's something to think about in what we analyze. And of course, then these are just some of the stories that reflect my points. Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance, one of the great American writers. A great American essay. I used to love this essay as a young man. I still love this essay. But when I read it with you together, when we read these words, and by the way, here's the ending of this story. Nothing can bring you peace of mind but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. That all sounds beautiful, doesn't it? Until you read the essay. It's got 6,000 to 7,000 words. A lot of words. But if you get through with me, you will decide what self-reliance really means. Can you be entirely self-reliant? I don't need anybody, Jimmy. Do you believe that? That you don't need anybody? Huh. So even if the language feels challenging at first, stick with me, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm going to expand your ability to read closely, articulate thoughts clearly, and that's the beauty of these classics. Point 5. They offer us historical and cultural insights because they're old, right? They're old. They're a window into social values, conflicts of old. And like I said before, there's nothing new under the sun. For example, we cover the art of war here. War's been around for a long time. I had one person email me and said, wouldn't it be nice to just be without war? And I said to the person, good luck. It's good luck. There's always going to be conflict in your families, in the world, in your municipality. Wherever you live, there's conflict. I was just talking to someone that lives in the UK, and they finally, in her town, I'm not going to mention the town, settled the trash strike. They call it a bin strike. They weren't picking up the garbage for a year. For a year. Talk about conflict. What would you do? Holy moly. So, I mentioned the Canterbury Tales. This is one of the great stories, but there's I just told you the Knight's Tale. There's the Miller's Tale. There's the Reeve's Tale. The Wife of Bath's Tale. The Wife of Bath's Tale, by the way, if you think women's liberation is a 60s development, think again. Because women in those days, in Chaucer's days, they were not respected until you read The Wife of Bath's Tale. Talk about a women's liber. The Friar's Tale, the Summoner's Tale, and even the Prioress's Tale. And the Prioress's Tale, by the way, she's a nun, is one of the most anti-Semitic stories ever written. It's an unbelievable story, but you got to read it with me. And then there's Aristophanes' Lysistrata. I told you this earlier. This is one of the most hilarious comedies you'll ever read with Jimmy. This was written over 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece and Sparta, who were always fighting. And the women of Greece and Sparta finally said, and they got together and had a meeting, and they said, enough is enough. We're going to stop this war. Now, how are you going to stop this war? How are you going to stop the fighting? Well, they had a sex strike. No more sex. And Jimmy, what are you talking about? I will read it with me. Read it with me. And then there's A Farewell to Arms, one of the most beautifully written American stories you'll ever read, Ernest Hemingway. Just a beautiful story about an ambulance driver named Lieutenant Henry who falls in love with Catherine Barclay, one of the nurses. It's beautiful. It's tender. It's violent. And it's a great story. And when you read it with me, you will find out just how great it really, really is. And don't form opinions ahead of time. But this story, ladies and gentlemen, has one of the best definitions of love that I've ever read. Better than some of the poets like Ovid. So, I'm not going to tell you the definition. You got to read it with me. But these stories, these classical works, bring an understanding of history. And they help us explain how the modern world that we live in came to be what it is today. So, the sixth and final point, ladies and gentlemen, is that they encourage patience and focus. What does that mean? Well, we live, I told you in the beginning, in the rat race, fast-paced world, right? Everybody, oh, no, I'm in a hurry. I got no time, Jimmy. I got no time to read classics. Well, you better find some time because you're missing out on a whole world of thoughtfulness that precedes you and me, that brings to you another perspective that you will not find in modern stories, in dime novels, I call them. You just won't. Because unlike online digital things, These literature, they require time and attention. What's the saying in IT? Garbage in, garbage out, right? If you put the time in, you're going to get something out. I'm just telling you, it's the truth. You may not believe me, but try it. You'll like it. Spend some time with the classics, with reading with me. I don't read to you. We read it together. And you'll find out that with patience and focus, your whole world outlook is going to change. It's going to change. Because every piece of literature that I read with you, I read the words, I analyze the words, and you're going to walk away with something you didn't have before. Now, if you don't need me, that's great. Read it on your own. God bless you. But I'm just telling you, you will not be able to cover it the way I cover it. That's one of the things I've done my entire business career. I've used the classics to be in business for over 35 years. Well, how does that work? Because I met these people. I met people in classical literature that I met in real life. Dostoevsky says we meet people in literature that are more real than real people. Jimmy, that sounds crazy. No, it's not. You meet murderers, good people, saints, right? You meet all sorts of people. You can live 400 years and you will never meet the people you meet in classical literature. Do you understand? So, ladies and gentlemen, reading classical literature is not rejecting modern books. Reading is great. Keep reading if you're reading. But I'm just telling you, on this website and my YouTube channel, what I'm here to do is help you read the words of classical literature, including the translations I pick, to gain a better perspective about modern books that you just can't get. You can, as I told you read a modern book, I'm not going to mention any names, you read it once and you're done. It's a one and done. These are not one and done. These are 1, 2, 3, timeless. I read one of these stories at least 100 times, and when I covered it on my website, I found new things. They help us understand who we are, who we should be, more importantly, who we might become. So, they teach us, as I said before, how to lead our lives by seeing how other people led their lives. I'm not saying you got to be like these people. I'm just saying when you expose yourself to classical literature, the way I am exposing it to you, word by word, this is, as Ezra Pound said, language charged with meaning. I'm going to repeat that. Classical literature is language charged with meaning. And that's what we do on my website and YouTube channel. We charge the language. You can see how excited I get, right, ladies and gentlemen, when I read out loud. So won't you join me? Even if it seems difficult at first, these lessons of beauty and they have relevance, I'm telling you right now, they're going to make the effort worthwhile. And I'm Jimmy. And I'm the one who will be reading to you every word, every nuance. I'm going to analyze with you, and I promise you, it will be just as much fun as it will be rewarding. You will make, there's no doubt in my mind, remarkable discoveries about yourself and, perhaps more importantly, about others. So come on down and read with me. You will not be disappointed. Thank you so much for listening.